Welcome to the Expert Network Team podcast.
Welcome to today's Expert Network Team podcast. I am your host, Nathan Merrill of Goodspeed Merrill, here with Carl Frank of A&I Wealth Management, and our bonus episode here with former Governor, Honorable Ricardo Rosello, the former Governor of Puerto Rico. And if you've been privileged to listen to our prior two podcasts, he has told us all about amazing stuff with regenerative health and stem cells and that sort of stuff. But he has a very unique background as a scientist who also did a stint in politics. And so, Ricardo, I want to give you the opportunity to explain yourself. How did that happen?
My wife asks me about this all the time as well. I will give it my best shot, but I was a scientist, and for the most part, I grew up around a family that was involved with politics. My father being a great leader, and when I saw the dark side of politics when I was very young. So when it was time to choose a career, I said I'm going to choose the complete opposite of politics, and I went to science. Little did I know, and I'm in wonder and awe with science, but little did I know that those tools that I was accruing were gonna one day serve me in my efforts to become a governor. So how did this transpire, and how did I make the switch? The first reason was Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, and I am passionately involved with one theme, which is ending the colonialist territory for Puerto Rico and transitioning Puerto Rico to becoming a state. I'm a proud U.S. citizen, and most of our islanders are, and we've been part of the United States for over 100 years, but we're still second-class citizens. So that was what first opened the door for me, because it was a passion project. So around 2012, there was a big plebiscite. Nobody wanted to touch it with a 20-foot pole. I was 30-something, and I said, "Well, I'll lead the effort." Right? A lot of the main politicians thought they were going to lose if they touched it, and long and behold, we made a very effective grassroots effort, and for the first time in Puerto Rico's history, statehood defeated the current territorial agreement. So that sort of spiraled me up into the ranks of potential leaders in the future, although I was still a little bit away from it. And again, I was very young, so I had no rush and no real desire at that point to do it. All I had was a desire for Puerto Rico to become a state. Fast forward, and one time I'm having a conversation with my father in a tennis court. That's how part of the way we sort of relate. We play tennis, we talk and so forth, and we started discussing some of the issues from the island, and I said, look, there should be a way of looking at this and not just hear the same song and dance every year and nothing happened. And approach it either scientifically or in a business fashion, right, with a plan and so forth. And so that got my gears going, and I started an effort that was called Plan for Puerto Rico. The idea was to instead of just having like these campaign promises towards the end, which is, it's tone deaf. It's like, I want better education. I want better healthcare. I mean, I'm still waiting for the candidate that says, I want worse education or worse healthcare. That you could give some actual action items to the people about what you were going to do. Again, very young, very naive, and very idealistic at this point. And I started that process not expecting to become a candidate, but expecting to give it to somebody that would actually use it. So as we were halfway through that process, I saw that none of the candidates were interested in what we were doing. They were interested in other things. So one day I had an epiphany, and I just said, "To hell with it, I will do it." Um, and that started again a race that was compelling. I had a primary against a very likable Congress member from Puerto Rico. He obviously was older, and as the story goes, he became governor after I did later downstream. I beat him in a close primary race, and then I beat six other candidates to become governor of Puerto Rico. And my narrative, I was probably the worst of them all as a polemist, as a politician, as a speaker, as a debater. But they sort of fell into the trap of looking at all of the things that I was presenting and arguing against them. Everything that I presented, they would argue. And so in every debate, it wasn't the discussion wasn't about healthcare. It was about my plan for healthcare, or it was about my
Oh,
plan for streamlining. And so I got I got the headlines, even though it was an attack, and people sort of had the sense that things were going to happen, right? They might have not gotten the finer points of it, but the things were going to happen. Um, and so, I get elected. We have this plan. We have the legislation ready, and people probably thought business as usual was going to happen. But when how it typically goes in Puerto Rico is January 2nd, you have a ceremony midday. You swear in, and then you start, and then eventually you get things going. I went to the president of the Supreme Court in Puerto Rico. She was young as well, but from a different party, and I went to her quarters and I asked her to swear me in. She was surprised because being from different parties, she thought I would look for somebody else. And she was like, "Oh, I'm honored," and so forth. And I said, "But under one condition." And everybody's looking at me like, of course, the other shoe has to fall. And I said, "That you swear me in at 12:01 midnight." And she's like 12:01, and it's like, "Yep, 12:01 midnight." And but we can't do it outside. No, nope. Swear me in at your quarters, and we'll do it at that point. So, long story short, swears me in at midnight. At 12:10, after I swear in, I have all of my appointees at Secretary of State, which is a 5-minute drive, and I signed my first 6 executive orders that changed the landscape, the fiscal landscape in Puerto Rico, right? Needless to say, I was heading into a fiscal calamity. I think this is what I spoke to Nate about. To give you context, when I came in, we had about $500 million in the bank, and we had an outstanding debt liability of $127 billion, right? So we had to come in, make changes. So the executive orders were in that vein. We signaled that we were going to start reducing costs, slashing the outstanding benefits, the outstanding budget that was in place right now, declare fiscal emergency, start reduce political appointments by 45%, and so on and so forth, to the tune that when people woke up that morning, the landscape had changed, right? The framework had changed, and some parallels can be drawn to what's going on right now.
I was going to say, did they take a page out of your playbook to?
It sounds a little bit like Doge.
It is. I mean, we did Doge before Doge, and perhaps it was, but we did it. We did it structurally. There was an entity created, a fiscal entity to drive these things through. Part of my commitment was to downsize government by about we had 120 some agencies. I wanted to get them to 35. I was only able to get them about to 80. But we downsized the agencies, and I was able to reduce the payroll by about 20%. And here's the kicker. I didn't have to fire a single individual but to do so. And it's because we implemented a set of strategies that I've proposed. They're in my Substack as well. I proposed Doge to use as well, to give people voluntary transition exits. You will pay for it today, but in 1 or 2 budget cycles, they're off the books, and that's kind of what happened to us. And so I will shrink it down, and then we can get into the stories. But fiscal crisis, I have to deal with an oversight board. We start to mesh things together. We pass more reforms in the first 30 days that had been passed in the last 20 years in Puerto Rico. And it was because it was a blitzkrieg, right? I call it in my book, I call it a blitzkrieg. It's even though the legislative piece, Trump is not doing it. He's doing it by the force of executive orders. I did this plan for Puerto Rico where I had all of my legislature sign a commitment that whatever was in the plan for Puerto Rico was going to make it into statute. And that included labor reform, reducing, downsizing government, private public entities, and so forth. And so we went in through, and I maximized that one window. I think that's one of the good things that I was able to do. I maximized the window of my highest influence as chief executive to get reform passed. Of course, still tinkering, battling oversight board, and as we're landing on something, 8 months into my term, not one but 2 major hurricanes hit the island. The main one being Maria, that many of you might recall, because it is the largest, most damaging hurricane in the modern history of the United States. And of course,
Was the other one Nathaniel?
no, the other one was Irma. 2 weeks
Irma.
before. So we were hit by Irma September 6th, 2017, and then September 20th, 2017 was Maria, and that was devastating. After that happened, the mindset was of twofold. It's not like a hurricane hit it; it looked like a bomb had dropped on the island. It's very hard to explain to somebody that wasn't there. But picture an island, no roads, no access to phone lines, water shortage, energy didn't come back in most places in over a year. It was a very grueling experience. So we had an emergency phase, a recovery phase, and then what I aspired to have, which was the rebuild phase, that was the light at the end of the tunnel. And in that time frame, I interacted plenty with President Trump. We had some good and we had some bad. And in my book, I talk at length about it, where essentially, I preface his chapter by saying, if you think I'm going to glorify Trump, you're mistaken. If you think I'm going to destroy him, you're going to be disappointed. I will tell you what I saw, and how I see this political phenomenon that I don't think is for discussion or debate, that he is, and what makes him tick, and what are his flaws, and what are his strengths. So I was able to get a bird's eye view of that, interact with him.
Do you think he's changed a lot since? I don't think. Probably you can relate to this as an outsider coming in at the machinery that is government. I don't honestly know that Trump understood what he was dealing with at the U.S. level. So, where some of your interactions, do you suspect they might go differently in the second Trump presidency?
Absolutely. Here's the dirty little secret that nobody is going to tell you. Everybody talks about experience going to office and so forth. There is no experience quite like being the president or the chief executive officer of a country or territory. The buck stops with you. There's no amount of preparation that will get you the inside track. You could have some, but it's not to the level. What Trump has now, and what I believe is his unique opportunity, is a few things. Number one, he is, other than Grover Cleveland, he is the only president that has been president, has had time to reflect on being president, and now gets to be president again. So he is really the most experienced person, other than Grover Cleveland, to go into office at that point. Number two, he is not limited by the constraints of a reelection bid, right? And number three brings me to the point which I tried to do in Puerto Rico, and I hopefully that was I had a lot of failures, but that was one of my successful parts, which was I was able to capitalize on what I call and others call the policy window, right? The moment in time where things align in a certain way and you can get things passed and things going just because of the level of influence that you have at that point, right? And Trump has that,
It's
right?
like the approval rating window, right? Like
It is.
everybody's on your side. You can't do anything wrong. You just push.
So he has, so the benefit is that he has the approval window, which I did, but the other added benefit that he has is that he had 4 years of work that he's done and 4 years to think about those 4 years of work that he's done. And that's why you see a barrage of executive orders now. My advice would have been that that not only do executive orders because they're limited in scope, but do statutes right now, like
Push the legislation,
push
right?
the legislation now, because I think a big litmus test, and I know we're jumping around and we haven't even finished on our stuff, but a big litmus test for me about his policy window and his influence was how many of his appointees were going to be confirmed, right? I followed the poly markets. I figured out some were high, some were low. And to me, I said, look, if he gets through all but, let's say, three of the appointees, he's got enormous power and enormous influence, right? Because that was kind of the discussion. People didn't know if Tulsi Gabbard was going to pass, if
Eskev,
Patel,
Kennedy, right?
Kennedy, and so forth. And he's passed them all.
Yeah.
They've all passed. So to me, it's just a litmus test of saying, hey, if I put something in front of Congress right now, two things are happening. One, Republicans right now are following orders in Congress to what following suit to what Trump's
MAGA agenda, right?
and secondly, the Democrats are completely shell shocked, right? They are completely at a loss and they haven't been able to reorganize. They will, and the Republicans being in line is going to crumple eventually. So why not take this moment to pass the important statutes and legislations that you want to pass? Because then what you have to do the rest of the administration is making sure that those get implemented, as opposed to have to lobby and fight those. So that would be a little bit of my inside baseball on
Yeah.
what I
No,
would.
and I appreciate you pausing your story to kind of interject like comparable experience. But so you had the two hurricanes, it was a bomb, you were getting to the rebuilding phase. I think that's where you
Yeah. And then that's sort of when and then I want to share with you a time period of about 2 months in 2019. In 2019, the polls in Puerto Rico, governors don't get reelected, not because they can't, but just because people won't have them, right? So it's the history, it's so forth. Typically, a governor is a lame duck by half of his term because the midterm polls show him 20 or 30 or her 20 or 30 points behind, right? May 2nd, 2019, that mid poll election comes out, and I am leading those polls. It was the first time in like 25 years that an incumbent governor was leading the polls. And I was leading. My closest opponent back then was behind me by about 17 points.
wow.
So I was, it seemed like things were right
You're on
on
the
the way
verge of making history.
for making history and for being reelected. A month after, I make my State of the Union address where I announce My first year of economic growth in about 20 years in Puerto Rico, the lowest unemployment rates in the history of Puerto Rico, the lowest crime rates in the history of Puerto Rico, and so you'd figure that just keeps getting a little bit better. Um, and then a month after, I'm in my office sitting down contemplating resignation. And you're asking yourself, how did this happen? And I'll tell you, and I'll show you how fickle politics can be, and how careful we need to be when this happens. Um, about 2 weeks before that, I go to my first vacation with my wife and my kids. I hadn't taken a day off since I took office, and two things happen. First, two of my ex ministers or secretaries got arrested for corruption charges. Mind you, the corruption efforts were spearheaded by a reform that we pushed forward and an MOU we made with the federal government to track down corruption. And a few days later, which was I think the powder cake that exploded, a communication that I had with my internal team that had very unfortunate language and so forth came out, and it sort of created, there was, even though these numbers were good, uh, there was still an underlying pain after the hurricane and after the death and so forth, right? That it just needed a little bit of a powder cake, and it exploded, and sort of from one day to another, I went from being a shoo-in reelected official to essentially being an outcast, and realizing very quickly in the span of 2 weeks that number one, my family wasn't safe. I had a lot of protests and a lot of plenty of death threats, and not only to me but to my children, um, but also that I wasn't, what I was elected to be, which was an executive to execute things. I was not going to be able to do anything else. I was going to be able to stay. And I remember talking to some of the lawyers, because they threatened impeachment and a lot of these things. Um, Talking to some of the lawyers, and they explained the case why none of this was going to happen, that I could just stay. Then I remember asking them, that's great, thank you, but let me ask you why would I just stay? Why would I hold the seat hostage, and through this pain? What's the benefit to it? And there was, of course, no real. They just looked at me with like deer in headlights look. And so I took the tough decision to resign. My reputation was shattered. I was painted as a dictator. I was painted as corrupt. I was painted as misogynistic and so forth. And it really hindered me. And I can only compare it to the way I verbalize it is, if you know Maslow's pyramid, there's a top level and a bottom level. I essentially went from the top level to the bottom in 24 hours, right? And it was
Wow.
quite a shock. I brought my family to the States, lived from Airbnb to Airbnb to a friend's house, for a little bit while I got my bearings going. And finally stabilized. COVID came in, which was another situation, of course,
A
that we all
different headline, at least.
a different, yes. And then a year, they investigated me and everything independent, and then a year and a half after the independent investigation, they demonstrate that the chat communications were modified, edited, and non-original, and that there was no crime or corruption or intent of crime or corruption in it. And so, but of course, that takes page 26 instead of the front page. Um, and I thought I was done, but here's the interesting last piece of it. I started doing my science and working, but there was a special election to elect our congressional delegates in Congress, and in 2001. And I was hearing people wanted to write me in. I hadn't gone back to Puerto Rico in a while. and so forth. And it started getting, but writings just don't happen, particularly if you're not campaigning or doing anything. And I thought it was cute and nice, and I felt I felt the support of some of my old supporters and so forth. But then one day I hadn't spoken, and my wife says, you need to tell, Beatrice says, I don't know what you're going to do, but you need to tell something to your people. They're expecting to hear something. So about 2 days before the elections, I said, look, I have no intent of doing anything, but if you elect me, then of course I'll be honored to serve, but in one condition. I said, I'm not going to charge. I'm not going to take a paycheck for it, for a variety of reasons. And then what do you know? May 21st comes around, an election, and people just come in and write in my name, and it's a hard name to write in. And I got elected to be their congressional, one of their congressional representatives, which in a certain sense, I mean, I'm very grateful, and I was able to be their representatives up until past December, with some other colleagues. Uh, but what it demonstrated to me is that a lot of the people that supported me and that sort of got uh, under the guise of the cancel culture and everything that happened, their response was like, I don't care what happens. And the anecdotal story says that people would just go into the voting booth and just say, where do I vote for Ricky? They didn't even know what they were voting for. They were, where do I put his name? And lo and behold, there was that sort of secondary response to that unfortunate finish, but that slowly but surely has gotten, has helped me
Well, I
mitigate
don't
some.
know if I should congratulate you or feel sorry for you that you're back in politics, but that's
Well, I'm back out again, so my term ended in December. Now
okay.
I'm a little bit of an observer, but it was fun. It was great, and doing it for free, and just because of uh, the original theme that brought me into politics, which was statehood. It was essentially a seat designed to lobby for statehood. So I'm very grateful for it, and it was a great opportunity. And again, thankful for the people that saw beyond everything and gave me another chance.
It's a story of redemption, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard because you get to a dark point. You get to a dark when all of this happened. I would wake up in the morning and my modus operandi. People can say anything about me in policy or as a person or whatnot, but what everybody I think agreed, almost unanimously, was that I was a hard worker. Right? I had a lot of. I would wake up. My modus operandi as I woke up at 3:30 in the morning. I turned the light on my office. It would shine a beacon in San Juan, and everybody knew that the governor was working. So if he was working, then the staff had to be there early in the morning as well, and so on and so forth. So unfortunately, when I stepped out of office, that clock still ticked, and I would wake up, and I would draw things and make orders, sort of automatically, to realize that I had no orders to send anybody, and that was the first phase. And then the second phase was after, there's a point where literally, Carl, there were astronauts asking from space that I should resign. There was a very, very well
Wow.
orchestrated operation. And I had to ask myself, am I the villain? Am I the bad guy? And I
I
went
think
through.
you said the word. It was orchestrated. And you
Wow.
see that in a lot in politics. You and I talked about this personally. It is a tough business.
It is.
Then
It is.
Agonizing.
you mix in the party systems, and then you layer on media on top of that, and it'll eat you alive.
That
It
is
will,
agonizing.
and it did. But it was a great process, because it was a process for me for self-reflection. And after plenty of self-reflection and even writing a book, and my book has a lot of that self-reflection in it. It's a long one. But I came out with the following thought, which is very uh, anti-intuitive for a politician, and it is, you know validation is internal. I know after evaluating everything that I did, that everything, mistakes and all, everything that I did at every point during my tenure was with the best interests of the people in Puerto Rico at hand. And yeah, again, like, you can debate me on the merits, on the issues, on the results. I will gladly take on those debates. But what I won't accept is the intent. My intent was direct and clear, and that's what I have, and that's what I own, and that's what motivates me to keep on going, because I know that what I did, the intentions were right. Whether some of the results were not, that's to be debated.
Okay.
That's really brave. Yeah, thank you for speaking that way.
This
Yeah,
has
Nate,
been
if you got a
awesome.
question, go for it. But yeah,
Yeah, well,
I've
I
got one too.
do, I do, but I'm not really going to expect a full answer, and this would necessitate us probably, if you really want to get into something like this, because it relates to the whole Puerto Rico statehood thing. I don't want to take any more of your time tonight, but maybe another discussion later. But 2 minutes or less, Puerto Rico Statehood Act 60. How does all that stuff come together? And
It,
Act 60 for our listeners is a very favorable treatment or tax law in Puerto Rico that inures to the advantage of expatriates who relocate to Puerto Rico, that allows, those dreaded billionaires and mega millionaires to get out of certain domestic taxes. I love it personally because I'm a tax attorney, but how do you reconcile that, or how is that affected by this pursuit of statehood?
so as I told you, I'm a fervent statehooder. That's my top priority. But I'm also the writer and the signer of Act 60. I signed it actually a month before I resigned. Act 60 encompasses the work of previous governors that were amazing in that, and of course, but the idea was to create an incentives code that would give more of these benefits and would leverage them. Okay,
Right,
so how does it work? And this is, and I'll stick it to 2 minutes, but essentially, because we're a territory, we don't pay federal income taxes
right.
on the personal side and on some companies' sides as well. So what we did was to attract people that are builders, developers, great minds to the island, because we thought we have a lot of things to add. We gave them a preferential 4% tax treatment, and a host of I'm summarizing it,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
0% on the federal side, so that you would come and be a resident on the island. And the expectation is that not immediately, but as people start coming in, they will create these ecosystems of awesome
Absolutely.
brains
Right.
that will
Belt
develop.
Scopes in a way, going to Atlas Shrugged, you're bringing in the talent, and then you're creating that mixing pot for them to start thinking, how do we make this place better? Plus, you got all their money there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's starting to happen. I mean, the projects that are being discussed is just sometimes the executive action in Puerto Rico is a little bit slow, but it's starting to happen. And then so the answer to that, how does it conflict? Do I believe it conflicts? I believe it does not, and here is why. Every statehood, every territory that has become a state, it's not just a cookie cutter agreement. There are certain principles, of course, but everything else is a negotiation. When certain states became, I mean, I think when Utah became a state, there was some debt considerations, or some land consideration. There's all of these elements, and what I've
Also, polygamy. They couldn't practice polygamy anymore. And then there's Alaska. Alaska's got some things too.
Yeah, there's a lot of particularities, and what I've said, because this has been a staple, is like, look, once statehood comes, Act 60 is a contract, so contracts go beyond statute, and what we're saying is, sure, Act 60 could end after statehood, but not for those that are already within Act 60. Those would be grandfathered in. That would be part of our negotiation, so that we can keep
Well,
uh,
you'd have
those
some
flowing.
mass immigration right before. I mean,
Yeah,
it's bad enough as it is right now. I'm not bad. I mean, in a very good way. There's a positive influx of That it would be a nightmare. Real estate prices would go like that.
They're already up, and they're
Yeah.
going to keep on going up. And I'm telling you, I mean, it is an exciting. I've always, my vision of Puerto Rico was when I tried to communicate is I wanted a Puerto Rico that was open for business. I wanted a Puerto Rico that was a center of innovation. I saw Puerto Rico, and I still see this value as the connector of the Americas. Just because we're part of the United States, we're dead smack in the middle of the Americas. We have Latin American culture and upbringing. We're part of the United States. We are a security strategic position for the United States as well. And I wanted to blend all of those elements to add value to the offering that Puerto Rico had. So having that offering, I believe that Puerto Rico is in prime position to become a state. I think it's true today. I mean, I was recently in Canadian television, and they called upon me because of President Trump's comment about Canada becoming the 51st state. And I argued with them about it. I said, look, this is very different. Of course, the main difference is that Puerto Ricans want it and Canadians don't, number one. So democracy should rule. But number two, more nuance, is that Puerto Rico already has all of the federal infrastructure in the island. We're already part of the United States. We're already citizens. So when I see Trump, and this is me reading the tea leaves from afar, but I see Trump looking at this as an expansionist term, in a sense, right? And if that's your mindset, what better way and quicker way to start your expansion than with a territory of the United States that already has the federal structures in it, that already has U.S. citizens, and by the way, the last 12 years has had 4 plebiscites that have chosen statehood for that, and very nicely would round the Gulf of the Americas on the.
There you go. That you are a politician. You 100%. You haven't shaken it. I'm sorry to loop that in as your closing argument is Trump pretty well.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is I had this conversation with President Trump when I interacted with him the several times that I did. There's one interesting exchange about statehood that I have. He would invite me. I had a good relationship with him for a period of time. I was the only Democratic governor that he would invite to speak with the other Republican governors and himself. And he would bring the press and so forth. And we had an exchange. And so I said, we want statehood. And he replied, well, when you give me 2 Republican senators, I'll think about it. But then I took him on an aside and I said, look, Mr. President, you want to make America great again? What better way to make it greater than by expanding? And by the way, all expansionist presidents are considered great presidents. And that was my closing statement back then. Fell on deaf ears, but it might not. I'm hopeful that it might.
So we're going to blame you, or we're going to give you credit for the Gulf of America and Greenland and Canada and Panama and.
Yeah.
Well, super fun. This is awesome. It's been really great talking to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for
this is a real joy. Ricky, we look forward to talking to you anytime. And if you're ever in Colorado, please look us up. We'll take you out for a nice lunch and show you around, show you the mountains that are up here as opposed to the beaches where you're used to being from.
Beautiful. I love Colorado. I really do. So I will take you up.
We will gladly give you a first-class treatment. It'd be a lot of fun. Thank you so much for your time and these great stories. And I know there's a lot more where these came from.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Nate.
Nate, anything from you?
No, you can close us out.
Create a beautiful day.
Thank you for joining us today.
I hope you enjoyed the discussion and the information we shared.
We hope you enjoy the information contained in today's podcast and find it useful.
We hope you will join us again next time as we explore new areas of interest to our listeners or current issues we believe are important to discuss.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe so you are notified when future episodes are released, and also share it with a friend that you think would benefit.
If you'd like to meet with a member of the Expert Network team or have a request for a special topic you'd like to have us discuss on the podcast, submit those requests to info@expertnetworkteam.com. That's info@expertnetworkteam.com.
Thank you for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. We want to remind you that listening to this podcast does not establish a client-professional relationship with any of the professional firms represented, including guests, nor does it constitute legal, investment, accounting, or other advice of a fiduciary nature. The views expressed are those of the professionals only.
Investment advisor services may be provided through A&I Wealth Management. Securities may be provided through Genios Wealth Management.